I'm Julene Allen, and I'm CEO of Women of Color in the Workplace. Welcome to Conversations for Equal Pay Live. My co-host is COO of Women of Color in the Workplace, Jamie Gathers. She's also the founder of Women of Color in the Workplace Atlanta. And also Maybelline Plessick is our Chief Diversity Officer.
Okay, well, I believe Julene has already mentioned a change of the format. So welcome to the discussion. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you, Jamie and Julene, for inviting me to be the Chief Diversity Officer. So this is definitely a important passion and mission, whether I'm working for my different organizations. This is always something that I've always been passionate about since I was younger. So just to give you a brief background, it all started because I was 8 years old and realized that being a girl was not okay. To give you some context, I lived in different countries. I was born in Papua New Guinea. My parents were in the United States, so we traveled almost 2 or 4 years. So I'm born in Papua New Guinea. My brother was born in Lesotho, South Africa. We lived in the Philippines. We lived in Honduras. Definitely Central America. We've gone through the Kruger Park. So understand some of the culture during apartheid. We were living in that moment as well, where we couldn't just go to any gas station or restaurant unless it was an international designated location. So we've lived through that. Growing up in Honduras, I realized that some of the skills and some of the lessons that we learned as a family and culture wasn't a welcoming environment, right? It wasn't okay to be a lady or girl to do a lot of things that I do. But still, let's talk about the pay, equal pay itself. Where many of us either work in an industry, we work on anything hospitality, it could be caregiving as a parent, right? We do a lot of things that not necessarily equate a monetary conversation, right? So we want to make sure that everyone knows their value, regardless of the type of role that we participate in the community, whether you're not paid officially or you're spending the time, right? So you have value in supporting your family, your children, educating them, being there, especially when your parents are becoming elderly and you have to be the support system for them. So that's part of the main theme, right? As far as making sure that that conversation goes through. Is that something that everybody's agreeable? We definitely welcome everybody's input. We want to be as genuine and authentic and definitely vulnerable as you can. So just share what you're comfortable with. We don't want to force anyone to share, things and they're not comfortable to share it. So it's an open discussion. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Julene, Jamie?
Yeah, I think well said. What an experience and what a life you've had already. Wow, it's impressive.
So I think if you're having trouble unmuting yourself, I am unmuting everyone. But if you have trouble unmuting yourself, just type in the chat box that you want to chime in and intervene in the discussion. That makes sense.
And also, if you have a question that you would like to pose to the group without asking the question yourself, feel free to ask that question in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll ask the question on your behalf without identifying that it came from you.
Yep, we definitely want to respect your anonymity, right? If you're not feeling comfortable to share with your identity, so that's good. And any questions, feel free. This is an open discussion to make sure that we share and speak freely. It's a space for everyone to feel like they belong, right? It's a challenging time. I know many of you have gone through the different changes, especially in the US. With George Floyd, and now recently more violence happening, right, in different states, in Illinois, Kenosha. So there's still continuous struggles here that are happening on top of what we have to do day to day to survive. Unemployment is one of the biggest right now. That's very challenging. I keep hearing the same story, regardless if it's in the United States or even in India. There's a lot in there, especially in India, where they're stuck at home. They're being told they're overqualified, even though they have the degrees. They're not able to get any employment because there's a freeze, which is understandable, right? Because everybody's monitoring the financial economy and socioeconomic impacts. So I definitely want to ask, that's one query that I want to ask. Can anybody relate, at least on the audience, any specific journeys and struggles that you're going through that you feel that you need support from the community as a whole?
It would be interesting to also just chat about, how COVID is impacting, women of color during this time. I know it's hard for working moms, but also, folks like me who don't have children. Just thinking about being afraid to make changes or to ask, if anybody else is afraid to, ask for or try for a change just because of the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, if anybody wanted to talk about that.
Absolutely. I welcome that because I know a lot of people have been asking whether they should change careers, even change positions, right? That's a conversation that's ongoing. They're not sure, is it too risky to do it, right? My answer so far that I've been telling people is at least interview, apply, get experience. You're not getting your credit check done during the interview. What I would recommend is if you see an opportunity, whatever it is, even if you're not qualified, just go through the journey. And if you have the time, to just practice, right? Apply for something just to see if this is something that potentially you could get for. So for example, my brother, he was entertaining, probably applying for a company that's not necessarily the best environment, but I told him, like, just check it out. You can't always judge the book by its cover. You want to be fair that maybe the opportunity that they say might not be in the job description because it takes conversation to really figure out what they need. So what I recommend is at least attempt it, see what this position is about, whatever that is, because you can always say no and decline and say, you know what, thank you for the opportunity. I believe that this is not the, position or role that I want to be in, but at least entertain conversation. Plus, you never know, you might meet people that are interesting, that are following or doing different journeys that you can set as an example. Does that make sense, Umi?
Yes, and I think, for people like me too, who are happy where they are, I think it's also a good time to branch out. There are so many virtual learning opportunities.
Exactly.
A lot of them are free, and so you can build out your skill set that way. And one thing I've been trying to do is also just go deeper in where I am. To kind of like things that I thought that I couldn't do before because I didn't have time. Now I'm taking those classes, I'm doing those workshops so that and I can really implement those things, at work and grow at work, grow in this time. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm happy to hear that. Jamie, you had something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think something that we should always remember is that typically in moments of crisis, there's always an opportunity. So whether it's an opportunity to grow or to take on more or newer experiences where you are, or to look elsewhere, because there are a lot of industries that are exploding because of COVID. Also opportunities for entrepreneurship. There's always an opportunity somewhere. It may not be easy to find it, but there's an opportunity. Touching on what Umi said about self-development and growth, there's always an opportunity for that. While people are working from home and spending more time at home, that's more time to practice that second language or more time to hone in on those skills that you've been developing over the years. And one thing I tell people, if you're not interested in entrepreneurship, always be interviewing. Even if you're happy where you are, always be updating that resume. When you tackle that new project, when you accomplish that new goal, when you get moved to that new position, always be updating the resume, always be networking, always be interviewing. Because it's not about being content with the role that you're in. It's about the role you want to be in 3, 5, 10 years. So always be ready, because if you're always ready, you don't have to get ready. We all know that saying. So yeah.
Perfect. I mean, go ahead.
Another
Jenny.
thing is for working moms, enlisting support. So, realizing that like there are some of us that may be working virtually and also homeschooling our children, but there are other working moms as well that are also homeschooling, right? And working from home. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, and collaborate with others that are at home and also trying to homeschool their children. Another issue that I've seen arise during COVID is women being offered opportunities that are much lower than what they're used to. And so my advice would be, to negotiate, possibly, maybe not necessarily saying no to the position, but negotiating flexible working hours or possibly working part-time or other types of benefits, things that would work in your favor.
Agreed. Go ahead,
sorry.
Go ahead, Jamie.
That's a great point, Julene, because one thing people should remember when they're interviewing is while money is important and you want to make sure that you have enough money to sustain your household, it's not the end all be all. You want to make sure that when you're negotiating, flexibility is important, making sure that they're willing to work with you, making sure their culture and their benefits support you the way that you need them to be. Because you could be offered a boatload of money and it still not be a great fit. So yeah, making sure that you negotiate other terms is super important as well. And during these times, a lot of people are quick to say, I just need to find something, but be careful with doing that, because if you're desperate to get into a position and an employer senses that, you may not negotiate the best terms, the best deal for yourself, and you may come to regret it, not even in the long term, probably in the short term.
Yeah, agreed. And don't underestimate the skills that you have. I think many of us underestimate how good you already have it, right? You're just not verbalizing it or you're not documenting it somewhere. So please remove that, thought that you're not qualified enough. We don't need to be 100% qualified. A lot of this is, think of it as a upward trajectory, a growth movement. Every time you're learning something skill, you can transfer it. So see what you can do to transfer your current skills to a new role. So for example, project management. I'll give you another example. I've been mentoring one of the amazing ladies that I have. She was a project manager, and it took several months that I was coaching her. So a lot of it, like Umi said, she was doing a lot of the online training from LinkedIn, any free edx.org. There were many online resources that she started taking advantage of. Another thing that she learned a lot from is PMP for project managers. So you could study for certification so that you know the terminologies. It was actually easier for her to do the interviews because she started studying for the certification, right? Because it gave her the opportunity to know, okay, how do I communicate this type of requirement, whatever it is that they need, into a language that executive levels understand. Somebody's a stakeholder. So that's another thing that I invite you all to start learning more about, is how do you translate what you're trying to message into different roles? So understand your audience, just like you're presenting, right? Make sure you know the curriculum, the language that they speak to, because they tend to agree more. And just for practice, no is always a common thing, but what you want to say is, if you don't know something, that's a great question. That's something you would try. This is something that I never thought about this before. So try to reword your response so you're not exactly saying no directly. So eloquently say that and still show that you have the capability to learn and grow and you're flexible to adjust. So the flexibility is important. And I think that's what I learned a lot from surviving different countries. I learned to read body language, learn to observe quite a bit, learn to not speak right away, right? So you have to have the patience, the temperament, especially for ladies, especially for women of color. We need to control our temperament. Don't just respond back. Take a breather, count 5 seconds, whatever is going to delay it. If you need to stand up, step away, walk to or you can excuse yourself and say, hey, can we hold on for a few? Let me think about this. So you have the prerogative to pace it. I recommend that you know how to pace it. Record yourself even. So I recommend that you record yourself visually, sound-wise, so that you understand the type of tone that you're presenting. And then have somebody in your family or friends that can give you a candid, good, constructive feedback. Say, hey, can you listen to how I sound? How am I presenting? Practice, practice, practice. A lot of sessions. It's invaluable for you to, even when you're writing, right? So if you're writing an email, writing a proposal, writing any documents, it's key that you read it out loud because you can hear, right, the script or the message that you're saying. So I know Julian knows this, Jamie. We try to have outlines as best as we can to hit certain points, and that's the same for any career level. It doesn't matter what type of role. And negotiation, I could not agree more with Julian and Jamie on that one. Negotiation from the top, because you can always go low, right? So go high when you're negotiating, and it's not just pay. You can get certification agreement, even school. You might even ask, like, hey, I would like to have this, and maybe you can support me on a bachelor's, a master's, whatever it is, right? You could negotiate it. Having time, is there anything that could be used for that? Or flex time, or really moving around things and say, you know what, at a certain point, I'm interested in this role. I would like to start with this, but is there any way for you to entertain that I would like to start here, but really I want to be in this role? So have that conversation and be practice in asking. I've never had a role where bosses didn't agree. I basically had a checklist. I was prepared to give options, 3 options. The first choice that you want them to give, typically people look at number 1, but you have 3 options as contingency for choices. Julian and Jamie, you want to add to that?
I agree with everything you said, and I actually had a recent experience for a consulting job. What I did was I put together a slide deck on, pretty much everything about myself, and I flat out asked for a certain amount of hour, and they were like, we have no problem paying you what you want. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for the big money. Don't be afraid.
So I think that's a great segue into talking about the pay gap, because women of color, depending on which group, we're broken down into different sections of the pay gap, but the pay gap exists throughout all women. And so I'm curious to hear if any of our participants have had any struggles or any experience. I guess, when did you realize that you were, I don't want to say a victim, but you were experiencing the pay gap? Does anyone want to chime in on that?
I'll share.
Okay.
The work that I do now stems from my experiences in corporate America. I was an insurance professional, and I didn't outright know like how much difference the pay was between me and my colleagues, or my colleagues and myself. But I knew according to lifestyle, it was clear, we were all pretty much doing the same thing. I had to travel pretty far because my house was where I live. It was, it was economically cheaper to live. And whereas my colleagues, many of them live probably in the surrounding areas of where I worked, which was a lot more expensive. And then they had a different lifestyle. So we're talking about not just married people, but single people that were like me. And so I knew that I was struggling, whereas my colleagues were not. And so basically, you can tell, right? You can tell when you're getting paid different than your colleagues. It's, sometimes it's just simple things like lifestyle, or, everyone's going to lunch and you. Did I answer your question?
You did, but you were cutting out in the last couple sentences.
Yep, just a tad.
Yeah, just a little bit. But yeah, that does answer my question. I think we've all had those moments. Myself working in HR, I was privy to everyone's salary. And, you would think if they would know that the person who's over HR and also sometimes over accounting, prior to me starting my business, you would think that they would know, well, she's going to see, everyone's salary. She's going to know. And I know everyone's education and experience, and I know all these details. And as I'm looking at the payroll reports and I'm looking at what everyone's making, and then the question was, well, why am I here when I have all of this and they don't, and I do all of this and they don't, you know, it was a flashing red flag for me. But ultimately, it's what fueled me to start my business. But you know, everyone doesn't want to start a business, so you shouldn't have to start a business in order to be paid fairly. What about you, Megwin?
I can agree with that. I mean, before I became a manager for 10 engineers, I didn't know their salary, right? But once I became their boss, I saw all their salaries and I'm like, wait a minute, I've been doing all this work, been busy, and they got paid more than I did, at least 10 times, 10K more than I was. So that was a realization for me when I said, you know what, I didn't ask enough, right? I was settling for less. And it's not like I didn't try. I was actually scheduling it every year. My boss knew. That was just me. Every year I would ask him to go for lunch and I'm like, hey boss, let's meet. It's that time again. Let's talk about a raise. So I was pretty confident of, based on the past, over 13 years of being consulting, that I would not wait. That's another thing that I would advise for everybody here on this call. Just because you don't have the yearly individual development plan or whatever recurring feedback loop that they have for certain organizations doesn't mean you can't ask for one. I would invite you to ask and say, hey, I just want to know where I stand. What am I doing great? What am I needing improvement? How can I get the support, the enablement that I need? And also, how can I ask to get more? Some of those people actually, especially the men, they're very confident. They will go in the door and ask the boss, like, hey, let's have that talk. They will go golfing. They will go to the bar, whatever. Asking a raise doesn't limit you to be in the office. You can have a casual conversation. And as long as you, in a way, train them to know that you are already expecting this, don't go in any job and not think about that, to be prepared to have that conversation. Start small, especially if you're not comfortable to do this yet, but start thinking ahead that, well, how often are you going to ask? Obviously, you need to be an asset, right? They need to show that this is a win-win, that you have value, you're an asset to the organization. What can you do? Can you offer that's beyond the normal things that you've seen others offer? And you have to clearly state that so that they know that, is there a metric that they're looking at? Is there a revenue they're looking at? What are they looking at for performance? If there is no clear one, then you might want to ask that or have somebody coach you. I recommend having a communication coach. If you haven't heard one, there are communication coaches out there. And Julene, one of them. Corinne is the one that I hired for myself. Resume coaches. You always, just like you have a fitness coach, you need coaches for different things that you acquire, right? It takes time, and you will not know unless you go through the training and self-educate. Read books as well. Self-education is important. Connect with ladies like we are, like communities like Women of Color in the Workplace. Lean in, find support groups. Don't settle for just one small. Ask around. You never know, another life coach that you can. And it's a common trend right now, right? Jamie, Julene, I mean, I'm starting to hear more of it. More people are starting to get into coaching, mentoring, training. That's how a lot of the startups are starting, especially the ladies. We're great at this. We have that awesome skill of having empathy. We're very patient. So that skill that you have right there, take advantage of that, right? Showcase, shine it, start talking about that awesome skill that you have. Even if just being independent, you have the initiative, your creativity, those kind of words, right? Start looking for words that define you. I know another one that I like doing is basically having the word for the year. Last year, it was all about excelling and moving on. This year was all about inspiration. So everything that I based my activity on, whether it's outside or inside of work personally, was based on the word inspiration. And I'm going to ask everyone, if you have a word, Julene, Jamie, do you have a word that kind of inspires you or symbolizes you for this year?
I
Humility.
do.
Humility.
Humility.
My 2020 word is forward.
Forward.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying, Maybelline, about that, because one of the things that I see candidates struggle with and employees struggle with is knowing their worth. And if you don't know your worth, if you don't appreciate what you're bringing to the table, what you've brought to the table, what you contribute to the team, you're not going to feel confident to go in and negotiate either an increase or negotiate the salary that you want to come in the door with. So it's important to document all of your accomplishments within that employer and with others. So you understand the value that you possess, because yeah, everyone's replaceable. They could hire someone else to fill your spot, but will that person have your skills? Will that person have your experience? Will that person bring the special something that you possess to that role? Odds are no. And even if they can get them up to speed from a skill set, from training, it takes time, and time is money. So know your value, know your worth, because you possess something that makes you special from any other candidate, any other employee that you bring to that team, and that has monetary value. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's unfair because men do not have to prepare, present, and practice, right? They're having an informal, very laid back, casual conversation with the boss, whereas we have to, do all this work, research, and monitor how we say our words, monitor our emotions, make sure we're not coming off as pushovers, or making sure that we don't seem too aggressive or assertive or angry. And unfortunately, that's the way it is for us, and especially particularly for women of color. But the objective is, number one, get into these positions of influence or seats where we can make decisions, where we're reaching back and helping other women of color. And if we are in positions where we're making decisions and we're able to help others, it is fundamental that we reach back and help other women of color, and not hoard these seats and hoard our power. And number two, it's fundamental. I tell everyone, the new feminist movement or the new intersectional feminist movement is all about making money and making as much money as possible, and not be afraid of making big money. Why? Because when women of color have more money, we can help put other women into political seats. We can fund and be charitable to the causes that are important to us. And we can support our communities, and we can send our kids to college, right? We can have a retirement, right? So it is fundamental for us to make as much money as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I would definitely agree with that. And I think another point that we must always remember, the saying about if there's not a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Well, I'm a strong supporter of the belief that if there is not room for you at that table, and if you can't fit your folding chair, don't be afraid to walk away, because not every organization is a good fit and worthy of what you bring to the table. Don't get so attached to an organization. It's great to have, to be passionate about what they do and to want to support their mission, but you cannot get so attached to an organization at the expense of your own self-worth. And if you go somewhere and they don't value you, and they don't reward your hard work, and they don't recognize your contribution, you should walk away. So
I cannot agree more on that. It's definitely a life choice. Trust your gut instincts, right? Mm-hmm. Listen to your voice internally, the safety, the thing that makes you move forward, right? If you can't breathe, you're starting to feel like you're suffocating, you're starting to get a high blood pressure, you're starting to get anxiety, depression, all that. That's a warning sign for you already to reflect and see what's causing it. Is it the job, the time, the schedule, the commitment that you're having to put in that's causing your health problems, or physical or mental, right? So gauge how your physical body's responding, how your emotions are feeling right now. Start taking a pause, right? Write it down if you can. Sometimes it feels better to just write it, just so you can have it exit your system. I've heard a lot of people say that it felt better just putting it out in the universe, right? So that then they can move on and follow the next step to move forward, like Jamie said, forward movement, right? Keep moving forward. And I agree, don't get too attached to a lot of things. That's not only organization, really anything that you're promising, that you're trying to commit. People change all the time. That's another thing that you need to understand. Relationship, right? Business and personal. Have a delineation and understand people that are really there to support you versus somebody that's taking advantage. Start paying attention to that. You can only commit. There's 24 hours in a day. What's your priority, right? Your health, especially when we're getting older, even more. You have to invest in your body to stay healthy at 60s and 70s. If you haven't already done that before, it's time to revisit that. Having an emergency plan, contingency plan for anything. What would happen if you didn't have a job? What would happen if you didn't have the savings? Well, what would happen if you got sick? You know, you have disability now. You know, what are your emergency options that will support that, especially if you're by yourself, right? What are your options for that? So start thinking about, how do you protect your best interest? And that's you. You are the most important person that you have. You can't really trust everybody else, but you have to put a trust in yourself, your mind, and your body that you can exist and live the way you want to live. Have that cause and love yourself enough, right? Doesn't mean, there's different levels of love. Love is giving yourself what you deserve, what you're worth, and recognizing that every person does count. We're all connected. We're sisters, we're brothers, everybody. Even if you're not vocalizing it, the energy that you put out there defines who you are, what you're presenting, right? And I usually, especially in a virtual meeting, I always love projecting as much as I can so that you get the full honest version of me. I try not to filter too much. I try to filter enough just so that you can accept or at least understand the message that we're trying to give you. And we give a lot. Julene gives a lot. JB and I mean, we overcommit every time. that's a bad problem with women of color. We give too much sometimes, right? And then you experience hurt. And that's why I bring that up, is because we do get hurt. We might have a front that we give. It's okay to feel not okay, right? Don't cover it up completely. If you're having an anxiety attack, you're having an event happening, let yourself experience it, let it be, and ignore everything else. You got to filter out the noise and say, hey, you know what? It's not a good day today. I'm going to take a break, take a pause, do something you love, whether it's watching a binge movie, whatever it is. Reward yourself every day if you can, and say, you know what? I made it today. I'm still alive. Your existence, just say it. Thank you for being there. Whatever belief you have spiritually, follow that. Follow what you love doing, what you're compassionate about, whatever it is that makes you want to get up in a day. Because in the end of the day, if I was dead tomorrow, does it really matter to stress on things that you can't control? And I keep telling my brother the same thing, because he overthinks, especially the overthinkers, people that are having hard time sleeping, right? They overthink. They keep thinking the problem out in different ways to try to solve it in 100 times different ways. You're over planning. Some of you that are planners here know what I mean. You over plan to plan.
I like that.
You know what? You're so right though, Maybelline, because I know I'm an over planner, and especially during these times with COVID and with the economic challenges that are going on, and today is actually Suicide Awareness Day. And so there are a lot of people struggling with mental illness in general, but then you compound that with a pandemic where people have lost loved ones and just the overall anxiety of the virus. And then on top of that, you have people with job losses and housing insecurity. There's just a lot going on. And I think it's super important for women to, and I know self-care is like the buzzword of the year apparently, but self-care is really important, and self-awareness, knowing when you're overloaded, knowing when you've taken on too many projects, knowing when it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it is important. I can't remember which one of you said it, but that's why it's important to connect with groups, to be, connected to someone, whether a mentor, whether it's, a sister circle, whether it's, maybe not necessarily your coworkers, because you want to be careful about what you share in a professional environment, because you just never know. But Umi, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I totally agree with you with self-care, right? An article just came out about all of us having our surge being depleted, which I think is, if anyone can find it, because I thought I was doing really well during COVID in that I was just doing more. I just like buried myself in my work and was just doing a lot. And so recently I realized that I was pushing myself harder than I did before and not taking that time to have balance. And so that's one thing just about self-care that I think is important. And everybody keeps talking about, this too shall pass and we'll go back to, what it was before. And I keep saying, well, how about we just dream of what we want our life to be after this versus putting ourselves in like a waiting area where like things are going to be fine. So what I've been doing in my life is saying, if next year we're still, adjusting and there's still social distancing and whatever it is, what do I need to be happy? What do I need to be happy now? How do I need to change my life so that I am happy? And so I think that was, one of the things that I said earlier is like growing within your job as well, is that's something that I'm focusing on now, is that I'm always focused on like, what should I be doing and where should I be? And this is the first time that I've just said, this is where I am, and let me figure out like how I can be happy here, while obviously, like you said, being ready at all times, so I don't have to get ready. But I am trying to enjoy this feeling of just being like, this is where I am, and how can I be as happy as possible where I am right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah,
I think that's healthy. Definitely.
Yeah. You, it's definitely a healthy approach and mindset to be present, right? That's what we're doing. I wouldn't wait till next year to find out what happiness means. I mean, we can only control today. So be happy however, or content or comfortable or just the way you are, right? So like you said, that's perfect messaging over there, Omi. I definitely recommend that within whatever role you have, how can you make it better? What can you do differently to make it, slightly better, enhance it a little bit more? Be opportunistic, right? So start being opportunistic. We're all salespeople here. You don't have to have a sales title to have to promote yourself. You are your branding person. You need to promote yourself, be proud of the accomplishments that you have, upsell. I cannot repeat 100 times, upsell yourself, and learn to talk that way. Because later on in your life, you're not always going to be the SME, right? Sometimes when we start, we're very technical or very much a specialist. But later on in your life, you want to be prepared to explain it in a business way that business people understand, the ones that pay the paycheck, the ones that buy those projects and sponsor the projects. It could be your company that you're starting up on. And if you are thinking of entertaining or trying out something, I definitely invite you to connect with people that are starting up just to see how that is. I know one of my friends, they found another friend that wants to start a new business. Entertain having that conversation. What does it take? And I definitely invite you to go to the Small Business Administration site. That's a very helpful website. It tells you how to create a business plan. What do you think? It literally has the steps, 11 steps. It tells you how to register your company name. What do you need to think about for copyrights, for trademarks, for intellectual property? Understand that clearly in the legality. Understand NDA for whatever organization. So be careful with your NDA, depending on what you're doing. Understand confidentiality, right? Know your limits on what you can share outside, whether it's business related, financially impacting, and even brand impacting, right? You are the face of the organization you represent. So just like Julene, myself, and Jamie represent the women of color in the workplace, whatever organization you're sponsoring or supporting, you are the face and you represent that organization. So it is an honor. It's an important, valuable, name is golden, right? So understand what your impact is, whether you are participating or leading different initiatives. And I invite you to also start initiatives, volunteer, whether you're testing for something, testing a new process, testing a new tool. Because when you start volunteering and say, hey, I have a willing person here that wants to try, you will be surprised how many people you get to connect with that are typically in a secret circle somewhere that you never thought you were going to be working with. It could be a C-level, it could be a VP in marketing, it could be a potential future that you have, but because you volunteer to try and be part of something, your network grows and you become somebody that they can sponsor. Your eagerness, your preparation, your personality, that enhances your position and as in your role as an individual. It will boost you up 10 times more confidence wise. So you want to add something to that, Jamie, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a book. It's called Your Network is Your Net Worth. And it's an amazing book, and it talks about exactly what you just touched on, making sure that you're connected. And one of the ways to get connected is through volunteering. I can't tell you just the opportunities that are made and the connections that are made through giving your time. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's COVID, how can I volunteer? There are a ton of volunteer opportunities out there. And a lot of times, if you're willing to volunteer your time, organizations are willing to train you. And those skills are transferable skills that will cross over into either the position that you hold or the position you want to be in. They can go on your resume and they can set you up for growth in the direction that you're trying to go in. I can't speak to volunteering enough. It's amazing to do because you feel a sense of fulfillment, but also because it helps you along your path and your journey. Yeah. Also, another thing I would recommend is if someone is going the entrepreneur path, in addition to the SBA, I would say to visit score.org because you can get a score